you so much. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I thank them for their generations of care for country and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Sovereignty was never ceded, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Superheroes in disguise. Let me tell you about the Patchwork Girl. The Patchwork Girl was born beautiful and perfect in every way, but she didn't know it. As a little girl, her parents would tell her, "Sit down, don't scratch, you can't do that, eat your vegetables." And each of those expectations, she was sewn like pieces of patchwork over who she really was. And then, of course, she goes to school, and her teachers tell her, "Line up straight, tuck your shirt in, you can't do that, stop talking." And each of those expectations were sewn like pieces of patchwork over who she really was. Of course, her friends had plenty to tell her about how she should behave, what she should wear, who were the cool kids to mix with. And all of those pieces of expectations were sewn like pieces of patchwork over who she really was. As she grew to be a woman, not only did she allow the needs and expectations of other people to be sewn like little pieces of patchwork over who she really was, but she actually went looking for them because that's what she thought it meant to be a woman. That's what she thought it meant to be an adult, to be a good woman, a good wife, a good mother. And this went on for years until one day she could no longer bear the weight of all those pieces of patchwork. They were so heavy. So she decided that she would unpick, bit by bit, each of the pieces of patchwork. Some were really easy to unpick. She go snip, 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 and away they fell. But the pieces of patchwork that had been there the longest, that were sewn with deep stitches into her heart, they were the hardest to unpick. But one day, all those pieces of patchwork had fallen away, and she realised that she was perfect and that she was beautiful. And she is me. And she is us. The Patchwork Girl didn't know that she was powerful until she started to unpick all the pieces of other people's expectations and other people's needs. The dark-haired woman bent over the bed. A man was lying in the bed, gasping for breath. His wife was standing at the back of the tent, watching, hoping, trying to think what else could she have done to save her husband. She'd seen so many people in her village die of this terrible disease in the lungs. Even just last week, her friend's 12-year-old son had died wheezing and gasping for breath. Could this woman, who was tending to her husband, help? Susan LaFleche-Picot straightened up. She stepped back from the bed, knowing that in the 19th century, tuberculosis was pretty much a death sentence. As the first Native American woman to earn a medical degree, she knew that it didn't matter how much medicine she gave this man, that he was past her help. As she looked around the room and turned to the man's wife, trying to find words to say to her, she noticed the empty bottles near the door. She knew so well the ravages that alcoholism were playing with her people, the Omaha tribe. She knew that men were drinking themselves to death, that violence was coming into families fueled by alcohol, as Native American people were losing their lands, being robbed of their lands, and had no power. Susan LaFlèche-Picot was able to take the little power that she had because she had experienced the systems and the injustices as she, as a Native American woman, had gone through medical training. She knew what it was like. She knew how to work in those systems, and she had decided that she was going to be a teetotaler. She committed her life to not drinking alcohol, to be an example to her people, but also to help them not only access the health care that they needed and that she knew she could access for them, but also to liaise with the Office of Indian Affairs so that her people would be recompensed properly for the lands that had been taken from them. Susan LaFlèche-Picot did not see herself as a superhero, but she used her innate power and intelligence in a time when women had very little power and Native Americans were operating under systems and structures that gave them no credit for their traditions or their needs. She did not see herself as a superhero, but she used the power that she had. She looks happy, doesn't she? This is me on my 50th birthday. I had a Hollywood party, and of course I was the star. I even had my own Oscar, stuffed Oscar the Grouch. So he was my Oscar that I could take as I gave my Oscars speech on my 50th birthday. Less than 2 months later, I was sitting across the table from my husband with my hands clasped tightly in my lap, saying to him, "I'm leaving." And when he said, "No," I said, "Yes." That was the bravest thing I have ever done in my life. With a really deep, strong foundation in the Christian faith, I had spent literally 4 years making lists, the pros and cons of having a divorce. Nobody in my family was divorced. Nobody in my church was divorced. You know, I was looking at, what does the Bible say about divorce? Doesn't God hate divorce? And I thought back to when my husband and I went, to be prepared to be married. The only advice we were given by the minister was, don't get divorced. That was the only pre-marriage counselling we were given. And I took that to heart. And here I was, 28 years later, telling my husband I was leaving. I certainly didn't feel very powerful in that moment. However, that was 2006. So nearly 20 years later, in these last 18 years, I have got a degree, done an honours paper. I'm now starting PhD research into the intersection of bias and shame. I've written and published 2 books. I've worked with asylum seekers. I've run a church and a welfare centre. And braved the wiles of online dating and got married last year. I did not feel like a superhero when I sat across the table from my now ex-husband and said I was leaving. Because I didn't actually understand why I was leaving, I just knew I couldn't stay. It took me years, it was literally about 8 years, but I'm on Nauru, we're doing HR training about different communication styles, and of course we talked about passive-aggressive. And I'd always known my ex-husband was passive-aggressive, but it was at that point, so I'm in a little island in the middle of the Pacific doing some HR training, and I realised what had been happening in my marriage. I call it death by 1,000 cuts. No raised voices, no violence, just little comments, often couched in humour. Oh, I was only joking. Can't you take a joke? Oh, you know. We've heard lots of passive-aggressive behaviour, I'm sure. But when you live with it for 28 years, it's like the literal, that frog in the pot on the stove just gets hotter and hotter until, well, I had to leave. I did not feel like a superhero. But in the short time that we've got together, I want to talk about the fact that I believe women have been fed two lies. The first is that we are princesses with no power and all we need to do is wait for that prince to rescue us from the tower or waken us with a kiss. Or, if we do use our power, we're evil queens who manipulate other people. And I can see some nods here. And all we are is just Cruella de Vil's and, wicked stepmothers. But I believe there's a third way. And in the short time that we've got together, I want to share with you a personal strategy that I've codified for women who know that there is truly more to them than meet the eye, or women who want to reconnect and rediscover their power. Because as we understand the powerful truth that there is truly more to women than meet the eye, and as we explore the power that we have, we can go after the dreams that we have, do that collectively, and I believe, create the worlds that we've been dreaming of. So how do we start? The first thing, so there's going to be 5 strategies, and I'm going to go through this 4 times. So I promise you it won't be boring. The first time is I'm going to outline what the strategy is. So there's 5 steps in the strategy. The second time I go through it, I'm going to tell you some personal examples from my own life so that you can see how this played out for me. Third, I'm going to go through it from a team's perspective, how this can play out as for you as part of a team. And then fourth, I'm going to go through it from a leadership perspective. So, cherish our needs. Now, if you're anything like me, even when I left my marriage, I had no idea what I needed, because I had spent literally decades of my life looking after other people, putting their needs first. That's what I was taught as a girl by my parents, that you put the needs of other people's first, and there's nothing wrong with being self-sacrificing and giving, and I think women do that quite naturally. However, for many of us, we lose sight of what it is that we actually need, what is important to us. So that's why I use the word cherish. Cherish means to hold something not only as important here, but important in our hearts. So cherish your needs. And if you're going, well, how do I even figure out what it is that I need? We can use this process. Now, science is starting to come on board with something that many of us have known intuitively for a long time, that our bodies actually tell us stuff that our brains haven't yet caught up with. You know, that there's a beautiful book written called, The Body Keeps the Score, that our bodies are actually going to tell us things that we may not cognitively have recognised. Sometimes the cues will be physical. Things like your stomach's churning, a weight on your chest, shoulders tensed. Or it can be emotional, where you're feeling frustrated, there's a sense of something is missing. So listen to your body. Don't just push those feelings inside and say they don't matter, because quite often what they're doing is indicating that something's going on that you haven't figured out yet. And I often find that with my emotions. If I get teary about something, and it took me years to allow those emotions to come up, now I know if an emotion arises and my brain's going, what on earth is that about? I just let the emotions come, and then later on my head figures out what it was all about. Sometimes my head doesn't figure it out, but my body has told me something, and I need to honour that. The next thing is then to ask questions. It's that, well, what's just happened? You know, has somebody said something to you? Have you been put in a difficult situation? Have you been asked to do more than you feel that you need, that you can? So ask yourself some questions. We've already seen today that questions are key in so many of our relationships, and they're key in our relationship with ourselves. And then thirdly, look at the stories. What are some of the stories that you've grown up with that around what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a giver, how should you behave in relationship with other people? Ask some questions, explore the narratives and the stories, and then you can get to unpick the things that no longer work. And one of the best strategies that I've been taught is clarity by contrast. And if on a piece of paper, and it has to be on physical paper, you can't do it on your phone or your computer or, you know, even a remarkable, you know, the digital paper. Draw a line down the centre. On the left-hand side, write down all the stories, the ideas, the thoughts that come into your head about who you are, and often all of them will be negative, if we're honest. And then, on the right-hand side, flip that. So if you've got a story that says, and this is one from my own life, oh, I'm too old to be doing this. I started this business at 60. You know, I'm too old to be doing this. Flip that to, I'm just the right age to be doing this. So flip what is often a very negative story from our lives, and then flip it into something that it's not just about feeling good or being positive, it's actually about telling yourself a new story about a particular situation, because all of us operate on stories. So that's the first thing, is to cherish our needs. The next one is to identify our values. Meg Selig wrote a great article on the net about how to identify our values. Like, we often intuitively know what our values are, but sometimes we don't. You know, there's lots of things we might value. So she suggests that you literally go to the internet, type in list of values, and you'll come up with many pages that you can just download. 50 values. Have a look at those values. Find the top 6 and then reduce it to 3. There is something about the number 3 that is really useful for human beings. It's something about how our brains are wired. That if we can have 3 steps, 3 values, we remember them and they stay firmly within us. So if you don't know what you value, go and look up a list on the internet. And when you're going through initially, you might go, oh, I can't reduce it to 6, let alone 3. Give it some time. You don't have to do this all in one go. So first of all, cherish your needs. Second, identify your values. See, these are quite intentional words. Cherish, identify. The next one is to understand what drives us. Now, one of the areas that I work a lot in is the area of unconscious bias. And that's what I'm going to be talking about here, about our unconscious drivers. And I think Kathy talked about groupthink. Groupthink is an unconscious bias, where people gather together and they think along the same lines, and they don't do it intentionally. So, have you ever had the situation where something's come out of your mouth and you go, shouldn't have said that, or that thought has entered your brain about somebody that you would never say out loud? Those are the things that come from our biases, our deep-seated biases. Because if we took a step back, we'd go, no, I won't say that. I won't actually say out loud what I was going through my head. Daniel Kahneman, who's a Nobel Prize winner, he posited there are two ways of thinking that human beings employ. The first, or system one, is fast thinking. You know, that snap judgment that you make. And that's where our biases sit, even if we're not aware of them. And then there's system two, which is the slow thinking. You know, the reflective, take a step back, let's look at the situation. Now, most of us like to pride ourselves on, oh yes, we're reflective thinkers, we're not reactive. But, you know, if we're honest, a lot of us react to a lot of situations. Another way of thinking about unconscious bias is something that linguist Roger J. Davies talks about, and he talks about bias operating as parallel world to rational and logical thought. And I love that idea. I'm a big Matrix fan, so as soon as I hear parallel world, I think, oh, red pill, blue pill, you know, down the rabbit hole, and, you know, there's the Matrix and there's Zion. But that's the reality. We've got our biases sitting here just underneath the surface, and they are impacting our decision making and our relationships. And then on this side, we've got our rational and logical thought, which, you know, we pride ourselves on being rational and logical human beings. And Davies said that bias is at play in every aspect of the modern workplace. So from retention and recruitment, right through to job allocations and promotions. So every aspect. And I'm going to detail some more areas a little bit later. So what's bias? I describe bias just as this sense of privileging, owning, or wanting to be part of a group of ideas or a group of people here. This fits with what I think, and this doesn't. So it's a sense of this is right, this is good, this is proper, this is not, I'll avoid this. A lot of our biases develop in childhood. You know, when we're tiny, we get messaging from our parents, from our schools, from our peers, from the media, from the sports club. People telling us what's good, right, proper, who to respect, who to unconsciously dismiss. Segel Barsade, who was management professor at the University of Pennsylvania before her untimely death a couple of years ago, she said that you can be the most consciously unbiased, progressive thinker and still have unconscious biases that come from our childhood and our growing up. And they don't necessarily align with your beliefs. That, when I read that, I thought, that is so key. Because we can have a bias in our head that does not fit with our beliefs or our values. And I'll share some of mine and what I've learned about myself. The thing that I see in this is that you can be a really ethical, moral person, and it does not prevent you from having biases. And you can be a person with bias, you can be a biased person. That doesn't make you immoral. The two actually go together as being part of being human. Because really, the thing that as I talk about bias, and as I do this in any of the presentations I make about bias, I really want people to understand this is just being human. It doesn't make you a bad person. I've got biases. It does not make me a bad person. Because what it does is when we start to understand about our biases, guess what? We've learned something new about ourselves that we didn't know before. And because we've got new information, we can do something with that information. We can decide, do this bias that I've seen, do I like it? Do I want to continue operating out of this way of thinking? And if you don't, you can make some intentional choices. So actually understanding that we have biases and moving to a place where we can identify them actually gives us power to make choices for ourselves. Cherish your needs, identify your values, understand what drives you, develop the subtle art of self-reflection. Self-reflection has been an aspect of being human for millennia. The Delphic oracle was inscribed on the Temple of Apollo, near where Athens is today, know thyself. So we're talking 4,000 years ago, people were understanding that knowing yourself is really important. And for me, the journey of knowing myself is a lifetime one, and I think it's the best thing that I can ever do with my life, is to know myself. I hear from people sometimes that they don't want to do self-reflection because I get this sense that they're afraid that they might find a monster lying deep within. So heads up, there's no monsters. Just like there's no monsters under the bed, there's no monsters lurking inside you. You might find out some things that you're not particularly happy with or doesn't fit with how you see yourself. But all that does is help you then, as you identify things, as you reflect on your life, on your behaviour, on your attitudes, then you can start becoming much more congruent with your behaviour and your thoughts and your attitudes with what you value. So self-reflection is such a powerful tool for us to use to know ourselves. I always say the harder but better journey is the one within. And then our fifth step in the strategies is to write a new story. I love this quote from it's attributed to the team at Harley Davidson. It says, "When you write the story of your life, don't let someone else hold the pen." Good stuff. When you write the story of your life, don't let someone else hold the pen. And I'm sure all of us have allowed someone else to hold the pen from time to time because other people have told us what to do, how we should behave, what we should think, what the direction in life should be. But we can write a new story. I'm living proof. I grew up to be a good Christian girl, a good Christian daughter, a good Christian wife, a good Christian mother. Now, all that Christian foundation's nothing wrong with it, but it shaped me in a very narrow way of being. Hello? Intelligent, articulate, opinionated woman. Are there any others like me in this room? Good. But in the church, I had to sit down, be quiet, play small, because that was what was taught. Be submissive. In many ways, my divorce was the best thing that happened to me, because although I stayed within the Christian community for a long time, I started to see things differently, and I started to write the story for my own life. How did I want to live? And I'll share with you a few more just little stories from my life. But this is a good thing to look at. When we are looking at how can I rewrite the narratives, start in the top left-hand corner. Think about what is it that you value. That's where you start when you want to write a new story. What do you value? Then move. Does the narrative, the story that you're telling yourself, like with me, I value my intelligence and my innate ability to articulate, and also the fact that I've got strong opinions. I do actually value that because communication is one of my values. But the narrative that I was being taught, that I had been taught from childhood, no longer fitted. If I was going to be true to those values, that narrative was not going to fit any longer. Then I had to think about, okay, how do you feel about that narrative? Do you like what you've been told about yourself? How you've been operating? And what would the world look like if I no longer used that story? Well, my world looks like I get up and talk to women. I get up and talk, sometimes to men, but mostly about our power. So let's run through some quick things from my life so you can understand how I've got to where I am. So with cherishing my needs. There's me. I think I must have been about 7. There. Yeah, I've worn glasses since I was 6. So 62 years I've been wearing glasses. No wonder my nose gets tired at times. I was the eldest in my family. And I was born 5 years after my parents got married, after they thought they were never going to have children. So this is the 1950s. So my birth weighed me down with a whole lot of responsibilities and expectations that were just, my parents didn't mean to, but they just placed those on me. I became the responsible girl. You know, I was the big sister. I've got a brother and a sister. And I took that responsibility into marriage, became responsible for my husband's well-being and his spiritual life and all of these sorts of things. And, you know, I worked probably 15 years of my marriage to try and make it work. So, you know, the first 13 were okay, and then the last 15 I'm, you know, flogging my heart out, trying to keep this thing together because I thought that's what I needed to do, because I felt responsible. And, you know, I now know, hello, a marriage takes 2 people to work at it. But, you know, the messaging I'd been given was I was responsible. And I've had to learn to let that go. And I think, I was going to share well, it's funny looking back, it wasn't funny at the time. I think I was divorced, so I had actually moved from Goulburn to Sydney. I was working with the Salvation Army at this stage, and my ex-husband had our youngest son. The other 2 boys who were older and got married. And my middle son blamed me for my ex-husband's failures as a father to his brother. Even though we were no longer living in the same town, even though we were no longer married, it was like he was holding me responsible, because isn't that what you do in a marriage? He said to me, you pick up the slack. And I'm going, hello, not married anymore. He's an adult. He can't, you know, father. And not that my son was, my youngest son was in danger in any way. Just he wasn't living up to my son's expectations, and then held me responsible. So we can communicate, and I'm sure I actually communicated that at some point to my sons, that I was the responsible one in the family, and my ex-husband could just get a pass. So I had to learn to let go of that sense of responsibility. I had to unpick that idea of being responsible, and had to really start to look at, what do I need? Who do I need to be responsible for? Me. That's it, just me. Identify my values. I said one of my values is connection, which is one of the reasons why I do this. Because I love seeing people nodding, because I go, oh gosh, I've got through, this is resonating with people. But courage. You know, I said the bravest thing I've ever done was to sit across the table from my ex-husband and tell him I was leaving. I've had so many people tell me, oh Bron, you're so brave. And I've got to say, sometimes I felt it was the only choice. That if I was going to move forward, I just had to take that next step. And then creativity is my third value. And being a woman of words, I like a little bit of alliteration: courage, creativity and connection. 3 C's. There you go, the 3 again. But for me, this is a creative endeavour. Preparing PowerPoint slides is a creative endeavour. Writing the script for this presentation is a creative endeavour. So all that I'm doing now is living out of my values. Understand what drives me. Now, I was working with the Salvation Army in 2012 when an email arrived to ask who would be prepared to go to Nauru for 4 weeks, because the Salvation Army had the contract at that stage in the newly reopened offshore processing centre run by the Australian Federal Government in conjunction with the Nauruan Government. And I put my hand up, not because I wanted to work in the tropics, nor because I had a burning desire to work with refugees. I'd never come across one. But I couldn't think of any reason why not to. Talk about sliding doors moments, serendipitous moments. That was one of them. So I land on Nauru, step out into the heat. Now Nauru is 35 kilometres south of the equator. You can drive around it in half an hour. You can walk around it in 3 hours, and I've done both. And I was initially there for 4 weeks. So here's a girl who grew up in the Southern Shire in Sydney, so very white, very Anglo-Saxon, very conservative, very Bible Belt. I've landed on a Pacific island, into a Pacific Island culture with 400 asylum seekers, all men who came from Iran and Iraq and Afghanistan and Pakistan and Sri Lanka and Ghana and a couple of other places in Africa. And there were all these languages floating around us. We have this little joke. If you call someone who speaks more than one language bilingual, what do you call someone who only speaks one language? An Australian. It's me, that's me. So there was, and most of the asylum seekers were Muslims. Hello, good Christian girl over here. All of these things were conspiring to confront me with my own biases. Because my body was telling me, oh, my stomach's going like this. And I'm thinking, what's going on? Because I was perfectly safe, I was physically safe. The asylum seekers were in a compound, like a fenced compound. There were guards everywhere. And as I asked myself questions and thought about the stories in my life, I realised that somewhere along the line, I'd been told that difference was a threat. That if you were different to me, then you were wrong. Of course, we were right. And that's what I picked up. That difference was a threat. And so here were all these people who were hugely different to me. And as I reflected on that more, I realised, okay, this is the basis for a racist bias. That as a white person, I trusted white people. I didn't trust these brown and black-skinned people who spoke languages I didn't understand. And then as I talked with the Nauruans who are on our Salvation Army team, because I'd realised, I started observing how the expats, the white expats, Australia, New Zealand, UK, USA, were fairly dismissive towards the Nauruans and their way of doing things. And I recognised I was too. It was like, hello, come from a developed country, got a university education, of course I know better. I sat down with Fatima, who headed up the Nauruan team, the Salvos, and I said, this is what I'm observing. She said, we know that about you guys, but we just accept it. It's a bit of a body blow, but it helped me I actually came across the term white privilege for the first time. Had no idea about it. So they were my two biases, that just going to Nauru and being thrust into an environment that was totally different to what I expected. I realised I have a racist bias, and not past tense, I have a racist bias. I will always have a racist bias, but because I know it, it's an information I know about myself. I then can choose, do I operate out of that or do I not? And of course I choose not to. I flip that story on its head. The difference is a threat, to see difference as an asset. Do I always get it right? No. If I see a group of young black men walking down the street towards me, do I instinctively take a step back, even if it's only inside? Yes. But I'm aware of it. And then that's the system one, the fast thinking. And then the system two kicks in and go, these young men are no more dangerous than any other group of people. So we get a choice once we understand about our biases. The same with my white privilege. I often say, white privilege is as natural to me as breathing. I so often do not see it. But I'm aware of it, and I want to keep learning about how it turns up, and how I display it in the world, and how I can not operate out of it. So my self-reflection. This is a picture of some of my experiences on Nauru. When I came home in 2014, I felt like I had a wall inside me. Not a wall to keep things out, but it was a wall bricks of experience, things that I didn't know how to process. So, and now some of them were fun, like the concert, where a group of people from a little choir from one of the ruined churches came into the camp at Christmas time to sing Christmas carols. Now most of the men are Muslims. There's a few Christians, but most of the asylum seekers are Muslims. But they always, anything to alleviate the boredom. So we've got probably 200 men in this tent. The choir's at the front, I'm standing off to the side. And the choir starts to sing Little Drummer Boy. And of course, you know the chorus, rum-pa-pum-pum. After the first chorus, 200 male voices who had no idea often what the words were meaning, because they didn't have much input, are going, rum-pa-pum-pum. It's this vivid memory, a beautiful memory that I have of community, of connection that people make. So not all the things in my wall are difficult. Some of them are beautiful memories. But I put it as a wall because that's what it felt like. I had all of this experience inside me and I needed time to process, to reflect. And eventually I cut the wall up and made it into different pictures because I'd taken some time to reflect on my experiences there. And then lastly, writing my new story, I talked about having flipped difference is an asset, difference is a threat to difference is an asset. As I did that, like these are some of the people who are on our team in Nauru. So, and they literally were, from Pakistan and Iran and Iraq and Afghanistan. They spoke Dari and Pashto and Urdu and Arabic, and all of those languages were flowing around us in the office. And I loved it. Like if they wanted to talk to me, they talked in English. But I loved listening to them. And there were Muslims on our team. And I learned so much from them. There were Buddhists on our team and Hindus on our team. Because as I was able to see what my biases were and see the old narratives that I wanted to flip, I could then open myself up and I could become a deeper, broader human being and appreciate the differences that were all around us. So what about in your team? Does this picture resonate a little bit? Where you feel like you're trying to go forward and your team's pulling you back, or you've asked to do something and you're being pulled in different directions. As part of a team, sometimes our workplace will have needs that have to be met. We've got KPIs to fulfill. We've got projects, we've got deadlines. But in the middle of that, it's really important to keep note of your needs as an individual. Because I think, we all know about burnout. Many of us will have experienced it. And burnout happens when we have put our own needs, we keep pushing our own needs down. And look, sometimes it's not easy to be able to address our own needs in the workplace when we feel that there's lots of push and pull, but stay aware of what your needs are in the workplace. Don't always be the one who goes, oh, it's okay, you can do it your way, or no, don't worry about me. There are times when, like Kathy said, sit there with your shoulders up and sit up straight and say, look, this is important to me, I need this. When it comes to identifying your values, sometimes we can, as part of our workplace, there are things that we might value. Sometimes we find that our values are around, I want to make a difference in the broader community, in society, and you might be in a role that enables you to do that, or that might be a position or direction that you're wanting to take. But start to think about, am I someone who has a bigger picture, who wants to see change in the world? Perhaps it's your focus, the things that you value, if you have a client-facing role, perhaps dealing well with your clients is something that you really value. More than just, oh, it's my job. This is actually something you want to value. You want to bring the best client experience that you can. Perhaps it's that you're in a position of leadership in your company or your organisation and you are wanting to strengthen the company's brand, their reputation. You're wanting to take the organisation in a direction that maybe they need to go in and they haven't quite seen yet. Or maybe you value not only being part of a team, but really seeing your team thrive. And we had, was it Amanda this morning that talked about teams? Yes, talked about teams, and I thought that was fantastic. You were really giving some very positive, practical things about how to invest in your team. And you're obviously somebody who values your team. You made that really clear. So these are some of the values that we can have in the workplace. And when it comes to our workplace drivers, these are some, I've got 5 biases that you might not think are biases, so let me go through them. The first one, micromanagement. Who's been under a micromanager? I was told how to make a telephone call. What words to use? I'm thinking, gosh, I'm in my 50s, I think I know how to make a telephone call. We all know what it's like to be micromanaged. You know, the person who's almost sitting on your shoulder, looking over your shoulder, telling you what to do. But the problem with micromanagement and micromanagers are that they are biased to their way of thinking, their one way of thinking. They cannot see past their own viewpoint. They can't see that you can actually get to the same goal but by a different route to theirs. Now, unfortunately, I don't have any magic bullets for micromanagers, but just be aware that micromanagement is an outworking of probably quite insecure person's biases. Second one is reprisals. And I was literally talking to a woman who works in one of the big hotels here in Melbourne just yesterday about this. She was fearing speaking up about diversity and inclusion because she didn't want to lose her job. Now, behind that fear, it's not her bias, it's a bias in the company, that privileging a particular way of showing up in the world. The company says that they're good at this, or they want to take this direction, they don't want to be challenged. When I first started looking at bias, I thought, oh look, it'd be good to see if I could get into one of the big telcos. And I won't know names, which you probably understand who I'm talking about. I went to their website and I checked out their board because their website said that they were, the diversity and inclusion were high on their priority list. Hello? 6 on the board, 5 men and 1 woman. But maybe I need to update. Went back and had a look at it today. 5 women, 4 men, all white except for 1. So yes, they've upped the gender, but got a long way to go to get past the 10 minutes. Beautiful. The stale white person, not just male. So when we see this lack of diversity and we see that people are fearing speaking up, there's a bias there because up at the top are people who go, it's my way or the highway, these are the right people, this is how we need to think. Okay, gossip. We all like a bit of tidbit, we all like to hear the latest story. However, what gossip does is it separates people. It actually takes a piece of truth, generally, and expands it a little bit. But what gossip does is it separates the person who is gossiped about. We put them over here in the category of, well, we can't, work with this person or can't trust that person, whatever the situation is. So be aware. Be aware of using gossip. be aware of passing on gossip, because what gossip does, what bias does, it separates people, it categorises people, and it excludes people. Then we have silos. You know those departmental silos? Oh, we've got a few heads nodding here, you know what I'm talking about. You know, where, well, sometimes it happens just between staff and management, when they're lobbing, you know, virtual grenades at each other, thinking that the other silo has an agenda. They may not. So if there are really big silos and a lack of communication, there underneath that will be some unconscious biases. You know, Kathy talked about groupthink. It's this whole idea of the way we think, the way we do things is right, and the way you do things is wrong. So just be aware. And then finally, assumptions, where we make assumptions about people based on their weight, sometimes their height, their background, their accent, their age, so many things. Give you a personal example. I'm a reasonably tall woman. My father was taller than me, my brother was taller than me, my ex-husband was taller than me, my sons are taller than me. My new husband is the same height as me. I saw he was 5'7". This was on Plenty of Fish. So, you know, but he talked to me online. I got so tired of the hello sexy butts. It's like, hello, I'm 60. I don't need hello sexy butt. You know, and Bill saw that I had a photo of a bungee jump that I'd done in New Zealand, and he said, his first comment was, I see you've done a bungee jump. I did one in Christchurch, and I'm thinking, hello, you might be a man I can actually talk to. But he was 5'7". There was an assumption that I had, because I'm a taller woman, that I needed a man who was taller than me, because that's what I'd grown up with. Now, if I'd allowed him his height, my assumption about shorter men to get in the way, I would have missed the love of my life. Assumptions. Sometimes they're funny like that, but others, sometimes they can be quite serious as well. So, self-reflection as part of the team. One of the, I think it's Francesca Gino, she talks about curiosity, because that's all self-reflection really is curiosity. Asking a question about what's happened, about what's going on. As we develop the art of self-reflection for ourselves, and we understand ourselves better, and we understand why we make the decisions that we do, or maybe why we behave the way we do, it helps us actually understand our team better. Not that we can literally get inside their heads, but we can start to go, oh, I can see behaviour there that I've done myself, or I can see a bit of me in them. And it just helps us be able to have more empathy, have a bit more compassion towards each other, have more patience. And sometimes that's all that's needed to resolve some of the issues. And I loved what Kathy said about being direct. Sometimes showing compassion is not just about sweeping things under the carpet. It's actually about directly addressing an issue, because if you don't address it now, it's only going to get worse. But understanding how we think and why we behave the way we do allows us to have compassion. And then we can write a new professional story. And I'm getting the times up now. I don't think I'm going to finish. 5 minutes. Oh, good. I'll get through it in 5 minutes. I wanted to tell you about Leslie Kay. L-E-Z-L-Y. Go and look up Leslie Kay on Instagram. Now, Leslie's in Perth. Up until 2 years ago, she had a $10 million recruitment company. She was 110 kilos. Now, she's a tall woman, so she could carry 110 kilos. But she was not happy. She had just absorbed the hustle culture. And in the last 2 years, she's left that all behind. She has left her marriage behind. she's dropped like 40 kilos, well, probably not 40 kilos, but 30 kilos. And she now has a business called the Conscious CEO, or the Grounded CEO. She knows she's got the ability to be a CEO, she's done it, but she's no longer going to do it by hustling. She's doing it by being grounded in herself and then showing other people how to be as well. So, quickly, cherishing needs as a leader. Sometimes it feels like a balancing act, doesn't it? But be aware that you have needs if you're a leader. Don't just subsume your needs to what the company is asking you. Values, we see them in the reception areas, don't we? You know, our company values this, this and this. This is our vision statement. This is our mission statement. But do the values of the organisation that you work for resonate with you? Are you feeling yourself in a place where you go, oh, this just doesn't fit me anymore? And it might be because the values of your company as a leader are not your values. Corporate drivers. Sometimes things like financial returns and addressing diversity and inclusion in the workplace impacts the bottom line. Good, I can give you lots of data, but I'm running out of time. Addressing biases in our corporations as a leader can build a healthy staff, build healthy client relations, because you're addressing those assumptions that you're making about people. And reputation, because a company reputation can be trashed because of unconscious biases that just quietly make assumptions about people or communicate that staff or their clients are not worthy because they're perhaps different. And then develop curiosity as a leader. Stay curious, keep asking questions, and write a new story. Love this quote. Stories constitute the single most powerful weapon in a leader's arsenal. Use stories as you lead your teams. People relate to stories. So, superheroes in disguise. Cherish their needs. Identify their values. Understand what drives them. Develop the art of self-reflection. The patchwork girl did not know she was a superhero, but as she unpicked all those pieces of other people's expectations and needs, she tapped into the power that had always been hers. Susan La Flèche Picot certainly didn't feel like a superhero, but she used the power she had for her people, the owner heart. I certainly did not feel like a superhero when I left my husband, but it was only as I stepped into my power by saying I'm leaving that I discovered that I had a power that I didn't know. We may not look like superheroes, but the thing with superheroes is their power lies within. So as we rediscover and reconnect with our power, we can create the worlds that we've been dreaming of. So now, to your case.
Fabulous session, Bron, given us so much to think about. We are pretty tight on time, so just the opportunity for a couple of quick questions. If people have got something burning that they're really keen to ask Bron right now, now is your moment.
And if you don't, I'm not offended.
Just while we're waiting, can I just check, Bron, are you able to stick around, or are you heading off straight?
Yeah, I'm going to be here into the afternoon.
Oh, fabulous. Okay. Any questions now? If not, opportunity. Oh, here we go, down the back. Thank you. Thanks, Elaine.
Hi. Thank you. That was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. A lot of learnings there from me, definitely, and stuff I've never thought about before. You mentioned at the beginning of your talk about getting emotional about things and at the time not really knowing the driver behind it. And it sprung a memory for me from years ago where I had a breakdown over buying the wrong mop head, and it's quite familiar. But I remember realising that, you know, this not the mop that's upsetting me, and then I had to think about all the different things in life that were making me upset about the wrong moped. I guess my question is though, I wasn't sure which one was causing the ripple effect on everything else. So do you have any advice on how to kind of target into what that might be?
It's interesting as you were saying that. I literally had an emotional. My lovely husband said I had a breakdown, but no, I didn't. I just had a big ugly cry, and he gave me big cuddles. And it was over a television program, and it actually wasn't the television program. It was what the television program was reminding me, and it was allowing a whole lot of pain to come up. So what I did for myself, and that's all I can say, is I value the emotion, and I know that it is telling me something, and I allow myself time to reflect on what is actually happening. Now, for me, that deep emotional time was about 3 weeks ago, and I think I'm still processing what is happening. So I think allowing yourself time to process, and it might take even years, because I sometimes think emotions that come up like that, as you say, over a moped. No, it's not a moped that's the problem. It's like it's the start of a well that's been opened, and then you start to see things. And I think it's that's where I see that as women, hello, we've got some things over the guys, because we are actually more in touch with our emotions. They're not a weakness, they're a strength. You know, I think Kathy's thinks about, there are times when we do have to just go and breathe in a meeting, but when we've got the time, the space to allow our emotions some freedom, and then allow ourselves the freedom, give ourselves the grace to just take time. You don't actually, and you don't have to have the answers all in one day. There might be more than one answer.
Thank you. Beautiful, thank you. We might just leave it there, knowing that Ron's going to stick around and knowing that we're